Boxing Bob Orton there. You see, we put this open contract to anybody that has been in the ring wearing a pair of tights, and so far we got nothing, and then we got a bunch of cowards that say, oh, we don't want nothing to do with Hot Rod and Boxing Bob. We don't want nothing to do. Bozo visits the zoo, my goodness. Are you kidding? Are you trying to tell me that you have come out here because you want to don the boxing gloves? Are you trying to tell me, Bozo, while you...
You know something, Roddy Piper? I would love to climb in the ring with Boxing Bob Orton. You don't know. You just don't know how much I'd love to box his ears in. But you know something? You've got an open contract, man. And I've got a very good friend who made me make one promise. He said, Hulkster, no matter what you do.
Wait. You have a friend, man?
Yeah, I got a very good friend. Something you don't know much about. Well, you know, the thing is, Mr. Piper, this friend of mine begged me, whatever you do, Hulkster, get a match with Boxing Bob Orton. And you do have an open contract, right? Anybody?
Any damn buddy that wants to box, anybody that wants to box Boxing Bob can box it. You can sign, I don't give a damn whose name you put on there. You sign it, he'll fight him. Mr. T!
I pity you, fool.
Wait! The contract was not over! You know, wait! We've been tricked! Hey, T, we ain't no...
Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is Shake Them Ropes, episode 98. Rob McCarran with Jeff Hawkins. It is Tuesday, the first full week of August. We are upon it as we head into the fall in a lot of areas, but we got some bad news, Jeff, on Friday. Just weeks after the passing of Dusty Rhodes, we heard about the passing of WWE legend Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper has died at the age of 61. Today on the show, Jeff and I are going to discuss our memories of Roddy Piper, what he was in wrestling to us, and go through some of the past moments. And coincidentally, enough or not, Jeff, our match, our Top 100 Network match that was scheduled for today. We previewed it last week. Greg the Hammer Valentine against Roddy Piper. The collar match from Starrcade 1983. We're going to discuss that match too, because that's the match that we have up. And it's weird, Jeff, how these coincidences have happened where we get a match and it kind of corresponds to what's happening in the news. This is another one. When Dusty Rhodes passed, our match after that passing was a Dusty Rhodes match. Money in the Bank came and we were talking about a Money in the Bank match. Like, we didn't plan this. It just happens. But your overall thoughts when you heard the news, Jeff, on the passing of Roddy Piper?
Definitely sad. I met Roddy Piper in 2007, I think it was, at my comedy improv theater. He was there watching a show, and then later, a couple weeks later, they made him do monologues and stuff, and it couldn't have been a nicer guy to just a bunch of, grown men who were wrestling fans growing up. I think he's extremely undervalued in the history of the WWF, WWE especially, because without him, the first two WrestleManias are not successes without Roddy Piper being the bad guy you love to hate. And there are a few guys who did that job as well as he did, and who ran their mouth as good as he did. And the other thing I always take away from Roddy Piper's career is he really overachieved, especially given that this is kind of a WWE centric show. He was brought in originally basically to be kind of a mouthpiece who bumped for guys, and then eventually became a main event player. I may be wrong on that. That's kind of the WWE history storyline that Piper will tell, but no one can deny that, given his size, especially if you watch his early stuff and him going into the WWE and then eventually becoming Hogan's main foil for WrestleMania 1 and, WrestleMania 2 for his friends. And then even within a lot of the mass marketing stuff or like Rock and Wrestling, which a lot of people learned about Roddy Piper through that way, or the Brawl to Settle It All on MTV and whatnot, really over overproduced in terms of what people originally thought his potential was going to be. And just the legacy he left in terms of, the first real heel talk show that WWE still uses the trope today with guys. The sketches, I mean, and Piper was just fearless. That's the other thing I really, really remember. He was fearless about, and sometimes to his detriment in hindsight, going racial, going sexual, saying what was on his mind at that moment in terms of ad-libbing and whatnot. There are a few better promos in terms of stream of consciousness than Roddy Piper.
Yeah, we're going to play some of the promos throughout this show. Of course, your memories go back a little bit more on Roddy Piper than mine do. Again, as anyone who's heard this show for a few episodes knows, that I started watching wrestling in the late 90s, during the Monday Night War. I was watching the WWF and WCW. So my first memories of Roddy Piper are his run in WCW. Like I remember the first, well, that's because that's when I started watching it. Like I would go on to know, okay, as I'm watching Roddy Piper on WCW Nitro, like obviously I would go and remember or look into the past stuff and, became quite familiar with his early, run in the WWF and whatnot. But I mean, my first experience as a 12-year-old kid is I'm watching this a little bit older guy, Roddy Piper, on the show with the older guys like Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. And he's running around all the main eventers. So I immediately saw Roddy Piper as a main eventer because he was a pretty big deal on WCW Nitro. And he was an interesting, quirky character. But yeah, as far as the WWF stuff, that came later. But my memories first off on Roddy Piper were from WCW. I mean, that's just because that's when I started watching. A lot of my first wrestling memories are from WCW because that was the first promotion I watched.
Okay.
So if there was a guy who was big in WCW, that's where I saw him first. And then you go back and watch the Ric Flair stuff from the territories and from WWF and whatnot. Then you go back and watch the Hulk Hogan stuff. But I'm not a 12-year-old kid looking at, mid 80s tapes of Roddy Piper. So the first stuff I knew was Roddy Piper, the quirky guy, the main eventer on all the shows, coming in and going out. Like Roddy Piper was always sparingly used in WCW. In my memory, it was so weird because he would come in for a couple of big events and then he would be gone for a while. He would come in and be gone for a while. I
could see you kind of going, well, what's the big deal about this guy then? Because that's how I always felt every time they kind of used Piper when they kept bringing him back over and over as a surprise guest or whatnot and kind of wearing out his welcome in both WWE and WCW. I could see you kind of being...
Yeah, but what would happen is, the first match I remember vividly of watching WCW because I came in the mid to late 1997. He came in, and in the middle of the NWO versus Sting stuff, like a couple of months after Lex Luger had beaten Hulk Hogan for the title and then lost it back to Hogan, Hogan was in a program with Roddy Piper, and they did the match at Halloween Havoc, the cage match. Where Roddy, but as a kid, I don't care about what's good and what's bad match. I'm 12-year-olds. I'm watching the big stars. That's why I was a WCW fan first, I think, is because, my brother started watching it. My dad knew who all the stars were in WCW, but didn't know any of the guys in WWF. So I'm watching WCW. And Roddy Piper is in the main event of the first pay-per-view, I remember, against Hulk Hogan. And he beat Hulk Hogan, who was never beaten. So my first memory of Roddy Piper is the guy who comes in and beats Hulk Hogan. And then Hulk Hogan goes on to his program with Sting. So, and that's why Roddy Piper always right off the bat. It's the same reason why Jeff Jarrett's a big deal to me, because Jeff Jarrett was a big deal when I first started watching. Well, Roddy Piper was a big deal when I first started watching.
Okay. My first exposure to Piper as a wrestler was the build to WrestleMania 1, where, he and Hogan and the Saturday night's main event and those kinds of things where he's the main bad guy. He's kind of aligned with Paul Orndorff, I believe, at the time. And then later Bob Orton Jr., of course. And that team blows my mind when you think about his past in Crockett. I had seen him once in Crockett, I think, before he left. I wasn't a regular wrestling watcher at that time, maybe flipping channels. I remember that. and I had been already firmly entrenched in Jim Crockett Promotions by the time I had come over to WWF. So I kind of viewed the WWF as kind of hokey, kiddie crap, cartoonish, over the top stuff. But you couldn't deny that that Piper was at least an engaging character to watch with his mouth.
Yeah.
Especially. And you knew that he was a big deal because they were focused. I mean, again, they focused when Rock and Wrestling came out, and Roddy Piper's the main bad guy in that show. And you're like, wow, okay, so he's the guy here. He's the guy that they're going to center, that's going to make Hogan the big hero here. So I'm old enough, I'm kind of at that, I believe, 12-year-old range, the same age you are, or were when you started watching WCW, when I get my first kind of exposure to WWF, because you couldn't get WWF where I was, except for Saturday Live, Saturday night's main event and stuff. It just wasn't in syndication where I lived, and I didn't have cable at the time. So, I mean, that's what I remember. I remember, the partnership with Orndorff that eventually fell apart, and then later the one that he's more famous for, the Piper Orton dynamic. With Orton as his bodyguard, which again I'll say is weird, because going back and doing research for our '83 match, Orton was one of the main henchmen on the heel side, and he was kind of like the opposite number of Piper on the face side. And I remember when I started to get into wrestling and I started watching Crockett a lot more, and I wanted to do more, go back and when they had video stores and you could go and you could pick up a compilation tape from either Coliseum or from Crockett Video, and popping in Starrcade 83 for the first time and seeing Greg Valentine and Roddy Piper. And it's like, oh, okay, I know those guys from, Valentine's the guy on the Dream Team with Brutus Beefcake, and Piper is Hogan's foil. And watching that match and going, where are those guys on my TV every week instead of doing this stuff? But that more made me respect Greg Valentine than shade Piper, because Piper was always great and just such a brat heel who ran his mouth and would troll Hogan to death, and Mr. T especially. I mean, that's the other lasting legacy, is he made Mr. T look like $1 million in that feud.
When I was younger, so we're talking the late 90s, you talk about going to video stores and getting tapes of past shows. Like, I would go do that too. And because the Blockbuster here would have, late 80s WWE pay-per-views and, early 90s stuff, not really any WCW stuff, but they would have, these pay-per-views where I would look at the boxes and look at the matches listed. And I would see guys like Ted DiBiase in matches. And, Ted DiBiase was a manager in WCW. So I'm like, okay, I know that guy. You'd see Jerry Lawler matches. You would have early Undertaker matches. Sergeant Slaughter, who was the commissioner in WWE at the time. So I'm like, I see all these guys on TV now. So I want to go see when they were wrestling. And, Roddy Piper was one of those guys, Ric Flair. Like, you see all these guys in the late 90s who were big stars in the late 80s, early 90s. And I wanted to go see their stuff. So that's kind of like the first wave. When I would go back and look at old stuff, it's because there was a connection there to what was currently ongoing on my TV. These were characters I already knew a little bit of, so I would go back and watch their older stuff. Generally I wasn't going back to watch like the Coco Beware matches because he wasn't currently a wrestler on TV. So I'm just going back to see the history of guys who were currently on TV. And, that's what started me watching the older stuff. And then, as the internet progresses, you find it more easily capable of going out to find older stuff on really anyone in wrestling. I think that's why I kind of like NXT so much now, because instead of having to wait for someone like Seth Rollins to be a big star in WWE and then go back and watch the old stuff, like I can watch their old stuff now. Like I'm watching the old stuff of a Chad Gable, for example. Say he's a big star in 5 years. I already see the old stuff of Chad Gable. So it's kind of one of those fun things for you. But going back and watching the old stuff of Roddy Piper, it was fun because Roddy Piper was in there with the biggest stars. He was in there with the main event of WrestleMania. He was in there with Mr. T, who was a colorful character who, kids knew about at my age. So Roddy Piper was one of those characters that you could watch the current stuff of, be entertained by, but then you really go and see the magic that he created. And you're right. Sometimes he was a little, socially risque, if you will. He was trying to be the bad guy. He was trying to get everyone in that arena to hate him. And
he was not afraid of cheap heat.
Yes. Yes. You did not have Twitter, and you did not have all the political correctness of today, because Roddy Piper, I think, would work today because, he worked pretty well doing promo work in the new WWE as he was a WWE legend coming in, but it may not have been to the same effect because he couldn't have done everything he did currently in WWE. And it's impossible to say who would work now and who would be a superstar back in the day and so forth. All we know is Roddy Piper was a superstar. He's a big name. The whole wrestling world took a step back when Roddy Piper died. He was a mainstream news story when Roddy Piper died. I mean, there were sports talk shows nationwide talking about Roddy Piper, entertainment shows talking about Roddy Piper, Variety covering the death of Roddy Piper, because he was a big multicultural phenomenon there in the mid 80s.
Yeah, he was a multimedia guy. They Live is a great movie. If you've never seen it, it's fantastic. It's probably one of John Carpenter's best. Have you seen it?
No, I have not.
Okay. Oh, please go out of your way and go see it. It's awesome. I won't do the blow by blow here, but it's basically aliens have inhabited the Earth, and the only way you can see them is these sunglasses that Roddy Piper has. And so he goes to take down this system of aliens infiltrating our Earth, and it's great and violent and awesome sauce. But I'd be remiss to not mention, of course, you look at the guys that they put, and they knew, I think, once Piper established his mouth when he was managing Orndorff and Dr. D. David Schultz, that they could put him with guys that didn't have that kind of charisma, that had kind of that quiet charisma.
Yeah.
To put it, because we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, of course, the coconut shot heard around the world with Jimmy Snuka. And my brother was a huge Snuka fan, even though he could never see him. It was every time there was a tape with Snuka on him, we had to get it. And of course, every time you showed the Snuka, you have Snuka on a tape, you show the Piper spit where he gets hit with the coconut and stuff. You put him with a Mr. T who didn't want to sell a fight or had an image, was very image conscious. Hogan was very image conscious. So as image conscious and tightly controlling of their image that they were, and as not as great of a promo as, say, an Andre or a Snuka could be, you throw in a Piper in there who has the gift of gab. And let me tell you something, doing research for our match today that we're going to go over later, that 83, that gift of gab, it floors me watching his old stuff, because he has two kinds of promos in there. He has kind of the quiet one where he's kind of playing with his hand, going a little passive aggressive, and then every time he needs to take a break, I have this involuntary response where I'll say, if I'm trying to think on my feet and I don't really have a path, but I'm trying to get the information in my head so I can stall. Mm-hmm. He does something cool where he just kind of he chuckles a bit when he has that moment, and it just keeps going and going. Or when he starts on his when he's in that high stakes, when he's going, when to use an A-Team reference, when he's on the jazz, when he's in full psychotic mode, he has kind of a moment between every beat where he kind of hyperventilates a little like that, and just keeps going, and his ability to have a continuous promo while thinking on his feet and improvising, like he'll have an object in his pocket and he'll start riffing on that, kind of like how Macho Man used to do in his early WWF days as well. And just go for like 3 minutes on a promo like that without ever, taking a break or umming or losing his train of thought is so undervalued when we're talking about the legacy of Roddy Piper. And he kind of has that Dusty Rhodes type of thing where his character outside the ring was so compelling and so larger than life, and so him, by the way, whether it be face or heel, he only tweaked it a little bit, which is why he had such a long-lasting career. But it didn't necessarily match having great matches in the ring, per se. He doesn't have a long litany of fantastic matches. He's a guy, pre-WWF at least, that looked believable in a scrap, because that was his life, being put out on streets and basically being raised by wrestlers all his life. He can make that believable, but he doesn't have a large work rate catalog per se.
Well, hello there. A lot of people been asking me why all of a sudden did Roddy Piper leave Atlanta. They said that I got beat up in a parking lot. You see, the reason I left was I got fired. And you say, well, now, why did he get fired? Well, it goes like this. You see, I came out of a match one time, and I went in the parking lot, and there was Buzz Sawyer and Ivan Koloff. Come up and boom, upside my head came Buzz Sawyer. And down I went and boom, Koloff. So I says to myself, I went back and I got my friend Mr. T. Mr. T. No. Stands for tire iron. I went back there, and I made Ivan Koloff look like a horny toad. Bongity. Last thing I saw, I looked, and there was Buzz Sawyer. Turned around, and I looked, and all of a sudden, the place was full of police. Said, boy, you going to jail. I figured it was time to leave. Being a sensible fella. Now, all of a sudden, get a call from one of my best friends, Tommy Rich. Says they got some guys running roughshod up there. Buzz Sawyer again bragging. Round. Typical. Says, takes Tommy Rich down and takes a belt with Wild Bill Irwin, the Buffalo Bill of wrestling. You see, I ain't personally ever been buffaloed. Takes Tommy Rich down, starts whacking him with a belt. With a whip. You see, now myself, when Tommy Rich says he'd like a little help as a tag team partner, I'm more than happy to oblige, and I just kind of like to get hit a bit. You see, when it comes right down to it, Bill Irwin and Buzz Sawyer, Bill Irwin comes out in this big cowboy hat with a whip, and Buzz Sawyer, woof, woof. Where I come from, we dogs, and Englishmen. You see, where I come from, it's as simple as this. I seen a lot of men buried wearing a $5 Stetson, brother, and carrying a $5 gun.
Yeah, when I look at Roddy Piper and I try to put him in context of other stars that are, from that same era and what we're going to remember most about people, because as far as name power in pro wrestling, I mean, Roddy Piper, as far as the 80s to now would go, Roddy Piper's in the top 10, don't you think, as far as who's mainstream recognizable? So you look at a guy like Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan's going to be recognizable for the troubles he's gone through ever since he was a full-time wrestler, maybe, yeah. But as far as wrestling goes, Hulk Hogan's most memorable moments were in the ring. You know, whether it was his in-ring matches with Randy Savage, whether it was the slam of Andre the Giant, whether it was WrestleMania 1, and his WCW stuff with Ric Flair, with Goldberg, WWF stuff later on with The Rock in the ring. Hulk Hogan was most memorable for stuff he did in the ring. That's how he became a big star. We talked about when Dusty Rhodes passed away that you may not have those most memorable matches with Dusty Rhodes, but you have all the recognizable moments from Dusty Rhodes outside the ring, whether it was his classic promos, whether it was stuff that he did with his sons on WWE lately, whether it was, being a ring announcer or an authority figure, whatever the case may be. Most of his memorable stuff was his promos before the matches, and you don't really have that classic set of matches to go look at. Roddy Piper, in a way, aside from the WrestleMania 1 match being so popular, Roddy Piper is kind of more towards the Dusty Rhodes category, is he not? Yes. Where you remember him for the Piper's Pit. You remember him for all the stuff that he did outside the ring because he was a flashy character.
You remember him for his quotes as well. Yeah. Every time they have the answers, I change the questions. Never bring a rock to a machine gun fight. Those kinds of things. And his promos, the infamous painting himself half black, the Piper's Pits where he and Orton are, shaving midgets or smacking around Frankie Williams, hitting the guy with a coconut. Even the one where he's, even the ones where he's not directly involved. I mean, he's in the one where Andre finally turns heel and rips the chain off of Hogan's neck. You remember him for that. And then after that kind of brief 3-year period in the mid 80s, after he leaves, he's every time they need a jerk on screen to be a tough guy or to stand up to someone who's also a jerk, it's always bring in Roddy Piper for the big pop and the short stay. Be it the Goldust feud later when Razor Ramon couldn't do it. The fight with Hogan when Hogan turned NWO and nobody from WCW would fight him. Mm-hmm. Those types of, the Morton Downey Jr. thing at WrestleMania where he put the fire extinguisher in his face and blew it up. Those types of moments.
Yeah, I mean, you go from he was kind of this way in the 80s, honestly, where he would come in for a big thing and then go away or not wrestle for a little bit in an important match. But really the 90s on, I mean, that was what Roddy Piper was, and especially when he got to WCW. I mean, like I said, I remember his WCW run, and I remember him being in important things and then being gone for a while or not in important things. And then every once in a while, here's Roddy Piper back, and it's a big deal.
Well, I think, and in Piper's defense, I don't think he ever, I mean, once he left wrestling for acting, I think he wanted to be an actor, because I remember, in addition to They Live, I remember he did, a few episodes arc on Highlander, the series. I think he guested on Quantum Leap as well. Don't quote me on that one. I haven't gone into his IMDb of late, but I mean, he wanted to be an actor. He wanted to regularly work. And then when that dried up, he'd go back to wrestling for a short stint, but he never really wanted to stay all that long, because that was just the way he was. I mean, he'd wear out his welcome, or something would, I mean, he'd leave at the first sign of something going wrong in the relationship. Before anybody could get one over on him, he'd leave, say goodbye and say thank you. And then they, but it also kept his interest level up in terms of every time he came back, okay, he's fresh again, which is a lesson not learned in today's wrestling, because everybody's on TV every week on every show, sometimes twice a week.
Yeah. The Piper thing, it's amazing, but you're right. He wanted to go into acting. He wanted to do something else. He was a guy that, didn't want to make wrestling the be all and end all of his money making ways. And he would go and do that, but he always had wrestling to come back to when something else didn't work out. And this was a guy that in the last couple of seasons of Always Sunny was still acting. He would make cameos in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He was doing all the movies. He was doing other TV shows. I mean, this is a guy who wanted to go into the acting. And in looking up information, again, because we're going to talk about the Hammer Valentine versus Roddy Piper match from Starrcade 83, I was looking on Cage Match, and they have statistics of, how many matches he had per year, and you can go back and look at all the matches. And I was really curious to see the matches in his WCW run, because after 1992, the most matches he ever had in 1 year was 12 in 1999. So he was really gone as a full-time wrestler in 1992. Yet still around for 23 years in pro wrestling. That
1999 run is kind of it's a blur for me, because I was kind of lapsed at that time. Yeah. So that was what, Millionaires Club or Magnificent Seven type.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the matches he had in WCW, because that's really where the point drives home about how he was in weird angles and weird match types. Like he would come back for something and then go away, because it was a lot of craziness once Russo was kind of involved and they used Piper in a different way. But yeah, 1992 was really his last full-time year, where he had 52 matches. I mean, he had one match in 1988. So after the first couple of years of WrestleMania, which were his biggest years in pro wrestling, match-wise and work-wise, it was kind of slowed down. I mean, he did, 86 matches in 91, but then it was kind of in the 40 to 50 range all throughout there. So, 129 matches in 1984, 128 in 1985, and then 75 and 86. So his biggest years there from 81 to 92 were the prime of Roddy Piper, going through the WrestleMania age. I mean, let's talk about, we'll talk about the late 90s WCW, but what about Roddy Piper of the last 10 years? I mean, Roddy Piper would go all over the place. He would be on WWE TV, especially when they had the old school Raws. He made appearances in TNA. He made appearances, obviously, at the end of WCW. He was making indie dates all over the place. I mean, he was at Maryland Championship Wrestling a week ago doing a Piper's Pit. This is a guy who was doing the indie dates. I mean, he was all over the place. And what were your thoughts about the last 10 years and seeing Roddy Piper on WWE TV in more of a Piper's Pit to try and get the new babyface over?
I think they overused it a little bit, as the guy that had some heft that would come out and basically get smacked around by a Miz type level heel, or the one I like. Remind me of this, because my memory is a bit spotty offhand. He was in the Jericho program with Steamboat and Snuka, right?
He was in the match.
That was awesome.
His last WrestleMania match.
That one was great. That one was really, really well done, I thought. And they kind of they kind of had the legends wear out their welcome then too, because wasn't that around that wasn't around the time of Nexus. That was in the summer.
It was a little before that. Yeah, it was a little before the Nexus. But you're right. I mean, they would overuse because when they were doing the old school Raws, it would always seem like the big stars they were always bringing back were Dusty, Roddy Piper, and Ric Flair.
Yeah,
and those were the three names that you were going to see on.
And then you'd have the different guys who were punchlines in the back, like IRS or the $1 Million Man,
right?
Or
Nikolai comedy characters now.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was WrestleMania 25. Ricky Steamboat, Jimmy Snuka, and Roddy Piper against Chris Jericho.
Mm-hmm.
So that was his last WrestleMania match. But yeah, he did a PWG show in 2011.
Yes, he did.
He did PWG with a reunion battle royal. He was doing, he did matches. He did a kind of an MTV little short match at Fan Access back in 2011. So like a TV promotion deal.
You also had to remember he had a bad hip.
Oh yeah, no, he was going through a lot of health things, just getting older. I mean, 2011, he would have been late 50s. WCW when he was working those matches every once in a while, he was late 40s. So I mean, he was an older guy and a guy who lived through the harder period of times where wrestlers, nowadays you might be able to go a little bit longer, or maybe not, just because of the schedule everyone does. But certainly he was working a hard schedule in the 80s. I mean, the matches may not have been up there in count total, but still, I mean, dog collar matches for 2 months straight with Greg Valentine, where he was bleeding all over the place. I mean, hard matches and stuff like that. So he was an older guy. But I'm looking his last WWE match, and I want to ask you if you remember this, because I had to go back and watch it because I didn't remember it all. His last WWE match was against The Miz on Raw.
Yes, I remember that one.
Where The Miz and Alex Riley were going up against each other now after WrestleMania. And Alex Riley is the guest referee, and Roddy Piper gets the schoolboy win, interplaying in a feud with Miz and Alex Riley. So he won his last ever match on WWE TV.
Mm-hmm.
His last match, what is this? Juggalo Championship Wrestling, I think.
Yeah, JCW.
Bob Orton and Roddy Piper against Mick Foley and Terry Funk.
Nothing wrong with that.
Roddy Piper.
I'd pay to see that.
Yeah, Roddy Piper getting the win on that one. So he won his last matches. But yeah, that was the older Roddy Piper. I mean, the Royal Rumble 2008, which is one of my favorite Royal Rumbles of all time. You got the mystery return of John Cena at the end. You got Mick Foley in here, but also Jimmy Snuka and Roddy Piper in this match, playing off their feud and the feud that everyone remembers, just with the coconut shot. Roddy Piper was a cool little entrance in there. Roddy Piper was one of those guys that could come back kind of like a Mick Foley in the mid to late 2000s, although I don't know if he really would be now. You would see Roddy Piper come back, and it was just cool. You see the older people in the audience, they're like, who are bringing their kids to pro wrestling, who don't really follow it anymore, don't really care. They would go nuts over Roddy Piper.
Yeah, I remember in WWE, I remember the Bad News Brown feud with Roddy Piper. The thing about the WCW run that annoyed me, and now looking back, I see what they were trying to do was kind of genius, but over our heads. I know they brought him back to stand up to Hogan, which was fine, but they also brought him in. There was that 3-way War Games where I think he was captaining one of the teams.
Yes.
And that was just unnecessary because you had, it was WCW and the NWO. And then you had this Piper group, and they were trying to play off the Piper Flair history. And that was a little bit too old for the crowd even then. 81, 82 type stuff. And they kept him on top there as the spokesman because he was a presence, but no one ever really made that connection with Piper and the history with that federation because the nostalgia then was, Horseman, Dusty, Flair, Magnum type of stuff. It wasn't, that pre-dated 81, 82. That was still a little bit too old for everybody to remember. So looking back on it now, it was a genius type of move, or it wasn't genius, but it was aiming high and missing completely.
Yeah, he came.
But they never associated, but they also, when they brought him in, they never associated him with WCW all that much. They made him an outsider with his own outsider group. So it's it's faction wars again, which is a Russo staple that never works.
Yeah, he came into WCW and had immediately the match with Hogan. at Starrcade 1996, won that match, and then lost the rematch at Super Brawl. But that's immediately where he went into that triangle stuff that you were talking about, whereas the NWO versus Piper's group versus Team WCW and whatnot. And he would eventually go with the Four Horsemen. But that was maybe one of his more famous angles in WCW as far as Roddy Piper goes, where he was on Nitro and looking to build his team. So he brought in a bunch of no-names and tried them out in the ring. Like he was doing little tryout matches with these guys to see if they could be on their team. And that's where, you know, future Horseshoe in WWE made an appearance. John Tenta was involved in this. One of those more famous angles that you remember from Roddy Piper. But we have these matches every once in a while. Like I said, the Steel Cage match at Havoc 97 is one that I remember because it's one of the first pay-per-views I really remember even trying to watch or trying to get the information from in the 90s. Go on to feud with the NWO for a while, but also when he wasn't quite the main eventer anymore in WCW's eyes even, Bash at the Beach 1999, the boxing match with Buff Bagwell. Trying to play up the boxing match Roddy Piper had with Mr. T. You brought Mills Lane in to referee it. Roddy Piper and Buff Bagwell. And that was in the same area where, you know, Buff Bagwell was getting his mother involved in everything too. He did that match in July. He was gone for a while. Then he came back to do a little gimmick match with, you know, guys named Gerald and Patrick playing off of the Stooges in WWF. You know, who are the Harris brothers. You just had these weird things that Piper was doing because Vince Russo thought it was hilarious. But yeah, I mean, that's what I remember. As good or bad as it may be, my memories start with Roddy Piper with his time in WCW, and then through all the video packages. Now the internet being prevalent, you can go back and watch Roddy Piper's old stuff. And now WWE Network, you can go watch any old match in WWE from Roddy Piper you want to, is you get the full picture. And Roddy Piper's one of those guys where if you are a fan like me who started later, if you're a younger fan who's listening, who's big into the WWE now, and John Cena is the biggest main eventer you know of, Roddy Piper's a guy worth going back and watching not only the promos that build up, but watch the match. I like Roddy Piper in the ring. I think he fits the role. He wasn't a fat guy. He wasn't a guy who got over just on his promo ability and his character. This was a guy who looked like a tough guy who was going to beat you up. He's going to take the kilt off, punch you in the face, and laugh at you while you cry.
Yes, he's from that generation of guys that if you saw them in a bar, you wouldn't want to get into a fight with because he legitimately looked like he could kick your butt. You know, the Dick Slater, Harley Race, Bob Orton's, Flairs of the world, you know, Dory Funks of the world. I mean, you know, and especially if you watch his early stuff where he's kind of scrawny and he's scrappy, you know, he's psychotic in the ring. He's absolutely psychotic in points in the Valentine match we watch. For me, I'm always going to associate him with, of course, the Hogan program in WrestleMania 1 and in WrestleMania 2. And then every time some mid-card heel needed a comeuppance because he was getting far too cocky, you'd hear the bagpipes play and everybody would get a pop out of it. And it was kind of an overused trope by Vince, but hey, he knew to give some guys a payday, so you can't hate on that.
Brian Klein through the email, rob@voicesofwrestling.com, or you can tweet us at Shake Them Ropes. Brian Klein wanted to get his memory of Roddy Piper in. He says, last year Piper was on an indie show I went to see. He did a meet and greet and a Piper's Pit with Jake Roberts. Roddy seemed genuinely happy and excited to meet every single person in line. When it came to me, I told him that I'm a big fan of your work. Most of it was before my time or as I was a toddler, but I love watching all of your old content. He laughed and said, "Oh, really? Before your time?" and pretended to choke me out for the picture. The person running the line for the meet and greet then said, "Okay, Mr. Piper, time to move the line along." He said, no, this guy needs more pictures. I've been to meet and greets where the wrestler just seemed to be going through the motions, but like I said earlier, Piper seemed excited and happy to meet everybody. And Piper seems like that kind of guy. If you said something that struck his chord, he would go with you for 5 minutes just in conversation. He seemed like that type of guy.
No, that was my memory in 2007 when I met him. You know, he was upstairs in the balcony of my theater, and there were a bunch of guys who go, "That's Piper," and a lot of the women go, "Who's that?" It's Roddy Piper. Who's that? Did you ever see They Live? That was our first thing. Or we'd go WWF. But I mean, he stayed there. He took pictures with everybody. He answered questions very, and I think even to the point of almost being insulting to him. I think happy someone knew who he was, even though I think he was wearing the Hot Rod T-shirt. But it could have been more of a sweetheart. He wasn't standoffish at all, just inviting as if you had known him for a month or two, even though you had never met him in your life.
Yeah, Woody Page of the Denver Post, ESPN released video of them taping Around the Horn, and they were in between commercials when they just chat for a little bit. And it was on Friday when Roddy Piper passed away, and Woody Page tells a story about how they were walking down the street together. Woody Page was covering like the AWA or NWA at the time. And he was walking down the street to go get dinner with Roddy Piper, and a kid comes up to Roddy Piper and asks for an autograph. And Roddy Piper looked at him and spit at him and said, "Get lost." And Woody Page asks, "Why would you do that? This kid wanted an autograph." Roddy Piper explains, if that kid got an autograph, he would lose it the next day. But now, 20 years from now, he's going to remember the time that Roddy Piper told him to get lost.
And I think Piper was probably a heel at the time, so you played the gimmick outside of the ring, and that's awesome because I was when I could watch Around the Horn regularly, I loved Woody Page. Just the story of those two hanging out and the fact that Page covered wrestling fascinates me.
What do you WrestleMania 19? Safeco Field in Seattle. What's your biggest memory of WrestleMania 19? Like, what do you remember when someone says WrestleMania 19? What do you first remember?
Either Brock Angle or the Arn Anderson run-in on the Undertaker Flair match. That's what I remember personally.
Undertaker Flair wasn't that show. That was 18.
Oh, well, then I don't remember much.
Okay. You remember Brock?
I remember Angle.
I think people will remember Brock missing the shooting star press.
That's the first memory.
If you're looking at moments, you're going to remember missing the shooting star press. For me, that's the number one. The number two for me is Roddy Piper's return during Hogan and Vince. When he comes in the black trench coat with the mask on, Hogan and Vince are having this bloodbath match. It's going crazy. And all of a sudden you see someone going into the ring, eventually attacking Hogan, and it unmasked to be Roddy Piper, who hadn't been seen in WWE since the closing of WCW. He's got the white hot rod shirt on. He's a little bit pudgier because he had gone through his health problems. And that Safeco Field crowd just went absolutely nuts. Like, Roddy Piper, the moments, like, he has a ton of them. But that's one of the top two things I remember from that WrestleMania 19. So Roddy Piper, WrestleMania moments galore in his career.
I'll have to go look at that one again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think many people remember the Hogan-Vince match, really, except for the bloodbath aspect. But I would figure that if you ask someone and they said, yes, I remember that match, what's the moment they remember? It's Roddy Piper coming in and coming to get his revenge on Hogan again. Because I think most people, like, if there's one wrestler you put Roddy Piper in the ring with, like, who was Roddy Piper most associated with? With Randy Savage, I think most people would say Ricky Steamboat. With Austin, most people would say The Rock. Is it Hogan for Roddy Piper?
For Roddy Piper, it's Hogan. For Hogan, it's Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
But for Roddy Piper, it's definitely Hogan. If you're of that generation, yeah.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and our top 100 match. So what we've been doing on Shake Them Ropes ever since this list came out on WWE.com, they released their top 100 matches to see on WWE Network. We are at match number 68 now. And the match this week, as we promoted last week, was Roddy Piper versus Greg the Hammer Valentine, a non-title match at Starrcade 1983, as Greg Valentine was the U.S. heavyweight champion of the NWA, a championship that he won from Roddy Piper earlier in the year, and how he won that would play into this match here. But we're going to talk about Starrcade 83 for the second time now, because we already did Ric Flair and Harley Race, which is the main event of the show, as Starrcade 83 was known as Flair for the Gold. So this is the second match we have from Starrcade 83, Jeff.
Right, and the first Starrcade, and this would be also the swan song of Piper and Valentine before going up north to the WWF. After, I think after like a month or so, they were eventually swept away by Vince.
Yeah, they did this match, and then they had a couple more dog collar matches elsewhere in Canada, and they would be on the road for a little bit. But in January, they were.
Yeah,
they were
in terms of big event stuff, this was the swan song for those two. Greg Valentine at the time, arguably the greatest United States heavyweight champion of all time, and Piper had been feuding over this belt, and when Piper won the belt from Piper, when Valentine won the belt from Piper, it was due to a bell shot to the ear that was bleeding. That and this match is great. I sent it to you, where Piper not only is selling the ear, but his equilibrium being messed up.
Yes.
Which is awesome. And a doctor stoppage awarded the belt to Valentine. So Piper had been, trying to get Valentine to fight him, and Valentine had been ignoring him and stuff. And at the same time, more or less, he had been also working in Georgia, a feud with Buzz Sawyer, the Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. And if you want to see wild promos back and forth throughout the year, go watch those Georgia Buzz Sawyer, Roddy Piper promos back and forth that would be pre-taped back and forth on the show. But, eventually we have to start to build the Starrcade. So Piper's trying to think of a way to get Valentine in the ring, straps, chains, whatnot. So he comes up with this idea. He sends Greg Valentine a cake with a dog collar in it. And Valentine goes absolutely nuts. and then a few weeks later, Piper shows up on Worldwide to David Crockett, who is the greatest concern troll ever in terms of an announcer, and says, "Here, I'm a big fan of Valentine. I want you to give this gift to him from a big fan of his." And David Crockett, of course, all in, because he wants to see the face when Valentine opens the box. And it's the dog collar connected to a chain. And Valentine just goes absolutely nuts, throwing the box around, whatnot, while David Crockett goes, "Oh, it's from your fan. You should say thank you." It's a pretty amazing promo. But this was all for the build to a grudge blood feud at Starrcade 83. And to begin the match, both men have seconds, which I actually wanted to look this up because I wasn't sure who this was. I thought this was Valentine's father seconding him, but apparently this is Starrcade. This first Starrcade was a little bit like Night of the Legends or your Slamborees, or when you bring back the old guys for an applause. And in Valentine's corner, he had Gary Royal and Billy Howard seconding him. But Gary Royal's the guy with the luscious blonde hair in the weird tuxedo, talking smack to Piper at the time. He apparently was a member of a stable called the Convertible Blondes with Pez Whatley and Rip Rogers, which I gotta find some tape of that. And Bill Howard was kind of a late 60s, early 70s wrestler who Ox Baker had brought in as kind of a monster healer. And Roddy Piper had Brickhouse Brown, who was a mid-card guy in Charlotte, and Vinny Valentine seconding him. So they attached the dog collars and the chains. And Gordon Soley, of course, Gordon Soley and Bob Caudle, who are your announcers on this. Gordon Soley is Gordon Soley with the history here, saying he cannot be impartial, obviously. And this is a reference to something that happened in Georgia wrestling, where Roddy Piper, who was the color commentator in the Georgia territory in '83, as he was going back and forth between Charlotte and Georgia, had saved him from an attack from a much smaller and almost unrecognizable Magnificent Morocco at one time. So Soley bringing that kind of history into it. Soley, I think, was there with an agreement with Georgia Wrestling at the time, but don't quote me on that. But they get the collars attached, and we start with a neck tug of war.
Yes, we do. Yeah, I mean, Roddy Piper was staying in his corner, and they're not using their hands on the chains early. They're just trying to see who has the stronger neck.
Right.
And push and pull. And this poor Greg Valentine, who has a pretty thick neck, is wearing this dog collar, and it just looks like throughout the match, like he's struggling with this collar as if it's too tight. And he's already blown up because he's losing blood early. I mean, he gets bloodied up first in this one, right, as Roddy Piper is beating him down. And all I can think is poor Greg Valentine's going to pass out because the collar's too tight.
Two things early in this match that I loved on the introductions by Tom Miller, I think is the Greensboro MC's name. The kind of the 8-bit pictures when they introduce him. You have Roddy Piper, the good boy sweater, the collared shirt, And Greg Valentine looks like he's been picked up on a DUI, just kind of staring into the camera.
Which, by the way, is the natural Greg Valentine look.
It is. Greg, I love Greg Valentine to death just because of his longevity in the business, but he had the personality and the look of a fire hydrant at times. So he just has kind of this glazed stare in the camera as they took his picture. And for some reason, I've watched it at least 10 times and laughed every time. But the one thing that was really cool early in this match that I love, that kind of a little thing that people don't do anymore, is when Piper gets that first handful of chain and whips Valentine in the arm. And Valentine sells this as, ouch, that really stung, and he's kind of shaking out his arm like that. Guys don't do that in these kind of chain matches anymore, because the dynamic of the chain match and the level of violence in the match has kind of changed in terms of what's trying to be accomplished. In this match, we're using the chain as a weapon to try and beat down our opponent to get the pin, as opposed to we're just tying each other to a chain and trying to hit the four corners as we go around. But that was great. And then Valentine starts working over Piper's ear with this chain.
Yep.
Which had been damaged with the ring bell, and throughout the weeks of promos on both Georgia and the NWA, heels had been going after the ear the whole time. Dick Slater had gone after it. There's a clip of Flair saving Piper from an attack from Valentine, and Jake the Snake Roberts, who was visiting that week, trying to go after the ear. The ear had been a story for about 4 months, if I recall correctly.
November to April. So I mean, we're talking
longer than that.
Yeah, 7 months there.
Yeah. So and you know, they're kind of brawling using the it felt like a real fight with a chain. Like you'd wrap the wrist and you just do the one hit, but it would also hurt your wrist or your hand at the same time. So you'd only kind of do it once.
Mm-hmm.
And you hit each other. Valentine gets busted open first on the forehead. And then he goes into getting the heat on Piper by clubbing him in the ear over and over, and then using the chain and clubbing him in the ear. And this just opens up a gusher on the side of Piper's head. And Soley and Caudle do such a great job of fearing for Piper's safety, you know, recalling the equilibrium problem, not being sure if he can stand with the power. You know, the only way he can stand is because he's being attached with the chain. Piper does something really cool in this too. My favorite spot in the entire match is when Piper wraps the chain around the post to kind of pull Valentine into the turnbuckle there.
He's basically locking Valentine into the turnbuckle so he can't escape. And then he would just pick and choose his shots, and that's where he bloodied up Greg Valentine.
Yeah, he'd do that. He'd punch him, and then the chain slack would get a little bit loose, and he'd tighten it again and pull him back into the corner, go back and hit him again. I want to see that spot in the next chain match, be it Rusev or Cena or whoever uses it. Use that.
Well, the problem
is you'll sell me on the fight.
Yeah, and you know, it's great work there because these were guys that were going in with the stipulation and they were using the psychology of the chain. I mean, we talked about how they started with the neck tug of war, and then we do the pulley little action there with Hammer being stuck in the corner, and these guys were using the chain. It was a chain match. So they were using it. They weren't just wrestling, you know, with the chain on. It kind of broke into a wrestling match for a little bit there at the last portion. But otherwise, this was a fight where neither man can escape and they were tied together. And whoever made the best use of the chain was going to win.
Yeah, they were using it for choking. They were using it for just wrapping around a guy's various parts of his head and eyes and mouth and pulling it. They were using it as brass knuckles.
Yep.
They were using it to whip a guy. I mean, it was great. And of course, yeah, later it's a fight that then breaks into a wrestling match as Gordon Soley gets to say suplex a couple times.
Many times.
Yeah. but then it breaks into a fight again when Piper just gets tired of getting beaten down and just goes wild.
He goes wild because he had been busted open too, and he was having the ear issues. He's selling the equilibrium problem, so he can't even stand up straight. Like he's flopping all over the ring. He's trying to get up and he just can't do it, playing off the whole ear storyline. So eventually, like a real fight, Piper gets the advantage and he capitalizes on it. Like he gets the one up, So he just has to go, and he starts whipping and whipping and whipping Greg Valentine with the chain, eventually whipping him so much to the point where he thinks he can score a pin. He goes for the cover, and he gets the 1-2-3 via whipping of the chain.
Oh, not only that, not only whipping of the chain, but when he wraps him up, he wraps the chain around his legs for extra leverage, kind of hog tying him in order to get that leverage for the 3 count. And then Vinny and Brickhouse come in to celebrate with Roddy Piper for this victory. Soley and Caudle are so excited they forget it's a non-title match.
Yeah, Soley is, he's complaining, or not complaining, but claiming that as the U.S. heavyweight champion was Greg Valentine, and Roddy Piper gets the win, and the whole match, Gordon Soleil had thought the title was on the line because he was talking about how Roddy Piper could get this title back, the title that he lost to Greg Valentine. So Piper gets the victory, and Gordon Soleil is like, and we have, again, the new U.S. heavyweight champion, Roddy Piper gets the belt back. And then, like, a couple of moments later, as Piper is celebrating, as he's getting lifted up and there's no belt in play, Soleil just kind of sticks it in there and throws it in that I was incorrect. This match is not for the title. It's non-title, and then moves on like nothing ever happened.
Well, the thing that saves Soleil here is that Greg Valentine is a sore loser and still has the chain attached to him, or at least has access to the chain. And so he beats up the Geeks and then beats on Roddy Piper a little bit more until Piper fights back. And then in a huge roar spot, runs Valentine off, and to the loving adoration of the crowd, does the swinging the chain above his head like he's a giant conqueror.
Right.
We're going to become a couple of back whores, you see. That's kind of the nice part about having only one ear, is if you only have one ear, you only have to listen to half of Valentine's baloney, man.
Yeah, This was a fun match to watch. It goes to about 16 minutes. I mean, you can watch some of the promos beforehand and afterwards, and it's just fun to get into the story.
The Piper promo afterwards during the Starrcade broadcast is really good.
Yeah, this was definitely worthwhile as far as watching it. This was a match that they put on their top 100 to see before Piper passed away. Like, there's no doubt it would have been on the list, obviously, afterwards. I mean, this is one you go watch the whole Flair for the Gold. Why not?
Well, there are a few slow parts in there, but
doesn't watch it all. If you're going to watch 4 hours of SummerSlam this year, you can watch the 2.5 hours of Starrcade 83.
You can watch, Briscoes versus Youngblood and Steamboat. That's fine. That's great. It's a good match. And, Flair and Race and the other members of, the Paul Jones stable and whatnot who fight in this thing. Yeah, it's a fun old school pay-per-view. Go watch it.
Match number 67, the match we'll be talking about next week. And we hope all these participants are okay. No Way Out. No Way Out 2001. It is Steve Austin versus Triple H.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember this match at all?
Vaguely.
Do you remember the stipulation of this one?
No, I don't. That's a blur.
It is 3 stages of hell.
Oh, okay.
We are going to watch 3 stages of hell between Steve Austin and Triple H from 2001 next week on Shake Them Ropes, episode 67. Before we go, Jeff, anything from this week in WWE you would like to comment on?
I thought Raw was a particularly strong show. From front to back, I'm still happy with what they're doing with the Divas. I loved what they did with Seth Rollins here. I thought that was pretty good. And I'll leave it at that.
We did get a question on Twitter about, obviously Neville opened the show and they did the whole gimmick where Seth Rollins was trying to be sneaky to get El Torito into a title match by saying his opponent had to be under 6 feet and under 200 pounds. So basically making it a joke. And then Neville answered, and obviously commentary put it over like Neville was outsmarting Seth Rollins. Like, he fits that. Not everyone's going to be over 200 pounds. Back in the day when they were announcing Spike Dudley at like 200 pounds, it's not the current days. So Neville comes out. We had a question on Twitter whether that hurt Neville more than it helped Neville. What do you think on that one?
It didn't hurt Neville, but it doesn't matter for Neville at the same time because he's going right into this feud with the Arrow guy and Stardust, which he'll win. So he came out on TV and they were trying to joke around Torito, but the way the announcers didn't joke about Neville being super small, the way he participated in that match, he gave a strong showing, which he did again in the past against John Cena as well. The people respect Neville because he's a high flyer. He does cool stuff.
and he's respectable in the ring. He's never getting jobbed out. He's never losing in 3 minutes in an easy fashion. Like Neville is a guy that, he's someone who is competitive in there, even though he may not win, but every once in a while he'll get that surprise win. So you have to be still watching and paying attention to his matches. I don't think this hurt him at all. No. I think a match being in there with Seth Rollins only helps Neville.
I don't think it helps him either, though, because, during the build of the Stardust match, there's going to be some sort of distraction finish or something that kind of screws. It's not going to, I mean, let's put it this way. It's not going to push Neville into some sort of upper sphere.
No. I just think it helps him because it adds to the body of work of Neville having good matches in the WWE ring against big stars. I think Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar, obviously a plus as we head into SummerSlam. We are going to talk more about SummerSlam on the next couple of Shake Them Ropes episodes, including episode number 100, where we'll do our preview for SummerSlam. That is it for this week. I hope everyone enjoyed Shake Them Ropes. Go out and watch some Roddy Piper stuff, right, Jeff?
Yes, and I have a plug. Saturday, I will be on Sheet Sandwich recording with Hugh and Les, going over the UWF NWA merger and also the Crockett Cup 87. So that will come out sometime on Saturday.
If you're a fan of Shake Them Ropes, go ahead and give us a follow at Shake Them Ropes on Twitter is myself and the show. Jeff is at CrapGame13. Voicesofwrestling.com/STR is the website. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, any podcast player, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and more. And if you're a New Japan Pro Wrestling fan, catch our New Japan recap videos at youtube.com/voicesofwrestling. Jeff and I will see you all next week on Shake Them Ropes.
Roddy? Yeah, Andre the Giant, they say a lot of things about Andre. Say things like the bigger they are, the harder they fall, but you got to admit they don't fall so often. Andre has gained a little weight, and he's as big as he's ever been. And how are you doing?
Wait a minute, Greg Valentine. The U.S. heavyweight champ right here, Greg.
First of all, I'd like to ask him, what is he doing out here? Commentating over my match. The people out there don't need to listen to your lies.
He's been a gentleman.
You want to look at the belt, huh? You want to look at the brand new belt the NWA made for me, huh?
I didn't make it for you, and I wasn't lying. As a matter of fact, I thought you did a magnificent job there with that young fella.
He even commented about that. As I say, he was very complimentary to you.
And you say that you're the most successful U.S. champion. Yeah, I suppose it's easy to be the most successful U.S. champion if you never put your belt up.
What about that,
Greg? Oh, wait a minute, Piper. I've wrestled them all. I've wrestled Wall McDaniel. I've wrestled Mulligan. I've wrestled you. I've wrestled Ric Flair. I've wrestled Ricky Steamboat. The list goes on of United States heavyweight champions. And I am the greatest. All you got to do is go around and grab some magazine, ask Bob Caudle, go ask Jimmy Crockett, go ask anybody. But don't ask yourself, because your opinion doesn't mean anything to me. Piper, let me ask you something. You used to have this belt, right? Would you like to have it back?
Yes, I would like to have it back.
You're telling me, okay, you're telling everybody out there that I'm the greatest champion of all time because I don't put my belt up? Yeah. Well, I'm going to put my belt up. If you got enough gut, first of all, I think you're all mouth. But if you got enough guts, Piper, listen to me now, don't get mad. Just listen to what I got to say. Go out to your car or go back to the dressing room. Get your wrestling gear, understand? Get your wrestling gear. You say I've got no guts. You say I won't put the U.S. belt on the line. I'll put it on the line right now.
Right now on TV?
Right now. You want Roddy? I just wrestled this big fat wrestler out here. Now, if you want to wrestle me, you go out and get your stuff. I'll wrestle you.
You're on, Tootsie.